I now invite Harry Burke, Rózsa Farkas, and ieta Aranda to come back here in front so we can have the panel discussion. And it's great because we are very much in time. We're even become more Swiss than the Swiss, 10 minutes in advance. So we have a lot of time for the discussion, which is very good because this morning it was a bit frustrating. I'm sure you had some more questions in the audience and you couldn't ask them. So, where's it? Yeah, we're going to use the mobile microphones. I think it's better. Elise, do you want to start?
So maybe again I'm going to start with a question that tries to connect what we've just listened to. And to me it seems that in every presentation we were looking at alternatives or something that is not part of some mainstream, or at least trying to resist a format that, in your case, Julieta, for example, as you said, became too academic for the mission you gave yourself in the beginning with e-flux. In the case of Harry, people following Gomringer's legacy as a way to, I guess, escape traditional poetry that has very strong canons as well. Although he also entered, I guess, history. And in your case, Rózsa, trying to explore alternatives into publishing, considering that language is evolving and how artists are actually finding new ways, I'm not sure if they're new, but ways to actually publish their work and discuss ideas. So I guess my first question, maybe we can start with Julieta, is connected to that. Like, I think super community reflects that, because I agree that the format is much freer than e-flux indeed, but do you feel you managed to address all those issues that you were mentioning that you didn't kind of, or the format that you didn't manage to follow with e-flux? I mean, you said at some point that they were complementary, and I was wondering if you could expand on that, or if you feel that my comment on being resistant to a certain format is accurate. And yeah.
I mean, in this particular case, I don't know if resistance would be the correct thing, because it would be like resisting myself, and that's not entirely the case. It's more when something, like the analogy is like, I don't know, like I guess, like you have a child and you want it to become an artist, but it wants to be a lawyer, yeah, or something like that, or you want it to be a lawyer, but instead it becomes an artist, and you have to just let it be and do another thing. I mean, like I find that, like, at some point, the project became successful to a point that we didn't anticipate. I mean, like, this happened with just about everything we did with e-flux. We did not think that it was going to be 10 years long, yeah? Like, we started something thinking maybe we will do 3 issues. And then the next thing you know is you have been making a monthly magazine for 10 years. And it's like, okay, this is, you see it, and then is when you look at it, and it's like, okay, so what happened in these 10 years, and is it still doing what we wanted to do? I mean, like, it's great that it's still there, but a lot of the things that that we wanted, as Anton and myself, then have to accommodate the agenda and the desires and the writing curiosity of all the people that contribute to this project. So it's not anymore just 2 people trying to figure out how to do something, which super community, at least at this moment, gives us the chance to do. I mean, like, because with the journal, at some point, it also, people, you were talking about that at some point, like what happens with print, yeah? Like, people started wanting books, and then we became a book publisher. And we have to deal with making books, and that's something that I never in my life thought I wanted to do. And it becomes this animal that then you are farming, let's say, and taming. But it's a different. I mean, like, it's not the freedom that now we regained with this new project. So. if that answers the question.
Sorry, my first question maybe it was not super clear. I wasn't also sure about the question, but because I was trying to connect the three contributions, and I mean, do you agree that is that still possible to resist a format? Because I mean, you said maybe resistant is not the right word, but still, I think we here looking at alternatives, something that's different. And then it brings to mind notions such as being efficient. I mean, what about the audience? Because you said, Julieta, your agenda was actually devised according to your needs as artists with Anton and yourself back when you started e-flux. But what about the audience? How, I think I'm interested in this also relationship. How do you anticipate what your audience is going to be like, and how do you, react to that? And why would you need to find new formats? If how do you consider the audience within this, I guess, dynamic?
So in regards to like, if you're able to find alternative formats, I guess that was what I was trying to say, is that of course you can. You just need to be very wary of how those are so instantly subsumed or co-opted, and I guess that was kind of my point. And in terms of like alternative formats, what was interesting in terms of my trajectory with publishing, which, like you said, there's suddenly a demand for books, but was that when we started doing the publications, we started with online as well, like print and online started at the same time, and there was this idea somehow that, well, it wasn't online, it was a kind of download, but there was this idea that that would somehow be more accessible. It was kind of like a 90s, like, fetishizing the idea of like the internet as somehow being like this open space of access, but actually what you find is that it's not. Like, the things that are coming up in your feed are predicated on like what you're searching for, who your friends are, like what country you're in, what kind of internet you have, all of those things. And so what was interesting is that what became alternative was seeing how the kind of, these types of languages that are influenced by this kind of immediacy, or this like instant self-publishing on social networking, how that kind of had changed like the artistic language. So there's something, I guess, of like online language, but it's inherent in the kind of the written form of these printed books, and that people wanted the objects, and actually that I don't kind of frown on that, like, oh, people wanting books, I love having books. It's more actually that it became a much more kind of like explicit like locator of the community that's around Arcadia Missa, which is a fairly small one, and it is something that the print runs are so small, and actually most of the people that are getting them we're in some way in dialogue with, even if they're ordering them from Australia or from America or from from France, and so it was really interesting, because it was like what when we had the website How to Sleep Faster, the stats of like where people were looking at it from is exactly the same of where people were ordering our print publications from, so it's like it's the same network, and that actually that it kind of gave that sense of community, and so that in a way it was like alternative to go to print, whereas at the start we were like, oh my god, look how clever we are doing, like a curated digital space, isn't this amazing, like, we are using video, text and image, and then actually what we're doing is we're printing in black and white, and they're books, it's paper, and it works, so
Okay. Harry, maybe I have a question for you. What struck me when you compared Gomringer's poetry and the more, contemporary digital ways of reinventing poetry is the importance, of course, of the visual aspect, and that can be seen both as only for the visual aspect, and also if you want to go further in the poetry, you have to make it yourself, because you're choosing what you're going to read and which way you're going to read. It's very obvious with Gomringer, but also nowadays with most of the examples that you showed us. When there's a stream and lots of words, you choose the ones you want to keep, and you construct your own poetry. So, well, it's not really a question, but I was struck by that, and I was wondering whether you have something to say about that.
I feel like it was short. I feel like it was negligence on my part not to present any types of poetry that aren't visual, because obviously vision is just one type of hierarchy, and you don't need vision to read. You don't necessarily need vision to read. Yeah, I don't know much about tactile forms of poetry, or obviously the performance at the end you didn't need to see. It was sound poetry. So yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I feel. I don't know what to say. I feel bad. I feel bad now.
No, don't. No, please don't. But I'm wondering, is like I couldn't help but think or relate what you presented with site-specific art, but as understood in the 70s, that you need the reader to complete the work, and without its specific context, in this case the screen, and well, this visual constellation, if we just limit ourselves to this visual completion of the work. And I think I forgot what I wanted to say. But anyway, I saw a parallel with that. I mean, I don't know if you agree that you actually, you need the person who is behind the screen to complete the work, which is already the case with Gomringer, as you said. You have many ways to read the same poem, and actually yourself and your background and your, very personal being is gonna have an influence on, each experience of the same work, right? And in that sense, it's reader specific, but also, well, site specific, if I may borrow this historic term. I don't know if you agree with that, or if that helps you formulate an answer, or I don't know.
Yeah, just that reading a poem is always a collaboration, or writing a poem is always a collaboration between yourself as the poet, the author of the poem, and the reader, who of course can bring their own experience, their own associations to it. But I would also go as far to say or I think what I was trying to bring in today was that you're also collaborating with the technology of the page, or the technology of the screen, or the technology of the sound, and there's like non-human actors. There's obviously non-human readers of poetry, in terms of people experimenting with bots and taking up, for example, the certain keywords out of Twitter streams and formulating poems out of that. So I think the point is that writing is a very collaborative process. It's not just a single stream of thoughts that's then perceived as complete, but it's informed by the reader, and they're an active sort of co-author in a sense, but it's also informed by these other active co-authors, which are the objects and the technologies, and so I guess to bring it back to the first question, my point was that it was less in terms of like staking alternatives. It's just trying to be specific about the players that are involved, and what specific technology brings, be it the page, or be it a Kindle, or be it like a sand, or like the universe. Yeah.
Then this is just for you, because there is something that I like quite a bit about the formal aspect of, like the investigation that goes into the technologies from from the printing press to the illuminated manuscript to the emoji, to whatever it is that it takes to produce something that is not just the text and the cadence of the words on the page, but this extra bit that it tended to be formal, like quite formal, at least in terms of concrete poetry. But I always wanted, and I'm just like asking, since this is something that you presented today, I always wanted these very silly ASCII drawings to be included in the category of concrete poetry. So I'm just making a plea for the inclusion of ASCII drawings on the on the category, just for yeah.
It's not up to me. You can, you can have that. Sure. Yeah, I mean, depends on the ASCII drawing, because maybe sometimes it's just a drawing and not a concrete poem.
I'll look it up later. I can't remember her name, but it exists. I'll send it to you. I think it's I quite like what Harry said about writing being a collaborative process, actually, because, yeah, just for my own personal satisfaction, that's what I find kind of exciting, but also what is at risk with this, like, let's say trend, for want of a better word, in the kind of first-person narrative, or the, you know, the subjective voice that is kind of coming across a lot of the younger artists, poets that I'm encountering. And I think that, yeah, this idea of like that the individual, you know, it's plural actually, and that writing is collaborative is something that is really interesting. And I guess that's, you know, the way I think about that is much more of a kind of like how is the collective form now, and you're thinking about it in this kind of like as a writer.
Yeah. Walking is collaborative. But should we collaborate with the audience in terms of questions as well? I just feel very bad because in the first round there was only 2 questions, and there's a lot of people. I don't know. It's not up to me. Okay. I'm yeah.
Thanks, Harry, for.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have more questions. I'm happy to open up, but Sam, maybe.
Yeah, all right. No, I just when I heard you talking, I found it very interesting. I'm not sure I understood everything about your analysis on first person, and but I found it very interesting, and it struck me also. It's maybe not exactly the subject, but we've had so many the last years, so many videos everywhere in every biennale, the same kind of pattern, this new model of video with either video or computer-generated images, and that first-person text, whether it's directly the artist or generally a mixture of an artist and, of course, something bigger and that goes further. I mean, Cecil V. Evans last year here, Ed Atkins and so on. It's always kind of same voice, and it has really become a format. And in a way, it joins also the idea of, it joins also the idea of form versus content, because you look at the images. Once you've seen one of those videos, you have the impression you've seen them all, and you start looking at the images, and you stop listening to what they actually say. Did you observe that? Am I the only one? Or?
Yeah. I think that, yes. I think, you know, that style. I should be very, that's the problem. It's like, I love, like, Penny Goring, who Harry and I both mentioned, you know, absolutely adore her work. You know, we've published her, we'll probably, you know, do some more stuff with her this year, hopefully. You know, there is, you know, this idea of the first person, there's nothing wrong with that. It's what you do with that. It's like whether you do that in a way to expand a conversation with other people and to actually try and like have a conversation that isn't like rarefied and you know, in a certain language that excludes, whether, you know, if it's done to open up something, then great. But actually, you know, there are examples where that, you know, where it's used, and it just it presents this like air of authority, you know, and it's like, that's kind of what I was thinking, what I think about speaking right now, you know. It's I don't have, you know, when I did an art BA, realised I didn't want to be and couldn't be an artist, and like halfway through was like, ugh, and kind of just started my own space. I have no like legitimate reason for, you know, being able to speak about this stuff, and actually, yeah, that's okay, but as long as you do it like with that knowledge and with wanting to speak to other people, and not in this kind of way where it's like, this is my opinion and therefore it's authority, and you know, and everybody else should somehow like listen to it. Like, people don't have to listen to me, you know, like I don't have to listen to Ed Atkins videos, I really don't, you know. So and like because you I wanted to read the quote, because the last one, and I think it's just important. It's not just about language. It's not just about the internet. It's about like how we've been individualized. So like the idea of the individual is something that has come, post-war, and is developed, and now is something that is being reclaimed as a politics. And how do we allow that to be a politics that we can collectivize with, whilst not flattening others, whilst not kind of being an authority. And so the Jackie Wang quote, I'll read it. So it says that, and maybe it's the wrong quote. Sorry. Oh, well, it's a different quote. No, yeah. So the politics of innocence and the politics of safety and comfort are related in that both strategies reinforce passivity. Comfort and innocence produce each other when people base their demand for comfort on the innocence of their location or subject position. And so Jackie Wang's text basically talks about how in certain struggles, the kind of movement is only allowed to have a struggle when there is kind of one figurehead that can, you know. So she uses the example of Trayvon Martin, and it's like, okay, so now we can have a struggle because he was innocent, you know. Not so it's about the individual's innocence as legitimizing a reason to call something out, whereas actually it should be the system in its entirety that's called out. So, you know, actually, it's the whole structure that allows things like that to happen that's being called out, not the fact that one person was innocent and another person wasn't. And that is kind of like how the idea of like this, you know, the individual is both kind of, a product of post-Fordism and post-war and all of these things, but is also being used in terms of left politics as well. So, I kind of was going off on a bit of a tangent away from the kind of writing thing, but I do think that they're related, you know, like, I do think that social media encourages this kind of both the good side of let's have a voice and also the bad side as well. So, hope that helps.
I think we can open the discussion to the audience with 2 microphones. Adrian Piper, maybe you want to. She kind of.
Hello. Okay. So I'm seeing a really interesting contrast between all 3 of your presentations and what Gilles did in his presentation. It seemed to me that his presentation was a very personal one. It was his voice. The texts were a mix of impersonal content and personal and autobiographical content. Whereas in the case of all 3 of your presentations, you were raising alternatives to that. Gomringe in the sense of collaborative writing, and also formal and impersonal writing. And in both Rózsa's and Julieta's presentations, you're raising objections to the way in which individualism and individuality can work in conditioning of voice. And you're suggesting that, as you say, the system is really should be the target of our concerns. But now see, my worry is that, yes, there's some standard objections to what is called liberal individualism, but there are also huge objections historically to collective action and collective decision making. And in some cases, there are quantitative results that indicate that collective decision-making is in fact impossible. So I'm just wondering how you handle those sorts of objections and criticisms, and whether your alternatives provide answers to those criticisms.
So can I go first? Yeah, I think basically you're right, and I think that's kind of the end of my talk. Was trying to say that's where I'm at now, because it's still a question, and Hannah Black, who I mentioned, a lot of her work builds on the reading she's done of Frank Wilderson, and actually this problem of kind of like solidarity as actually kind of marginalizing and not necessarily getting anything done. And and so, and Hannah was speaking a lot about kind of like the problem of analogy, and so the problem of kind of saying something is like something else, and so how do we collectivize whilst not doing that, whilst not making analogy, whilst not saying that we're all the same and we've all had the same experiences. And that, you're right, and that's something I don't have an answer to, but it's something that I'm thinking about more and more and more, because what excited me when I started Arcadia Missa in 2011, 2012 was that actually the individual voice or a different type of writing was being published instantly, and that was extremely exciting. And now we're at a point like, okay, that's accepted to a degree in certain spaces, but let's not forget where it's not. And also then, okay, what do we do now that it has been incorporated more and more and more into a kind of, a more dominant culture that, isn't necessarily the best one. So it's quite, I don't know.
This was actually quite part of the conversations that we have when we started Super Community, because of the name to begin with. It's like, okay, so we are naming something like Super Community. Really, what do we mean? And I think that we are trying to talk, to think in terms of dependencies, I guess, like the fact that there is no such thing as the isolated decision-making process, but that there are relationships of dependence between me and Andreas, and between me and you, and between me and the world somehow, that need to be taken into account, and that are fraught with conflict, and that do not result in consensus, and that they are also fragile, and the relationship that I have with this aspect of the world today will change tomorrow. So, and there are repercussions and echoes and so on. So, something that, it's very funny because we talked a lot about that. And one of the ways to solve it was when we designed the shape of the billboard that we had plopped in Venice. We did not want to have a rectangle. We wanted to have what was like a group of, let's say, several different rectangles or shapes sort of like forced together into this precarious equilibrium that ideally will not become and like that that principle is that hopefully we'll remember that what works today will not work tomorrow, and so that there is no, the community of today will not be the community of tomorrow, and we are not trying to build consensus, but maybe address things that are larger than ourselves, if that makes any sense.
Just quickly, I just say that maybe problematically but optimistically, myself as a reader, I like poetry as a site because I think it's often a mechanism, a place where this exact question and kind of struggle is fought in this very intimate way, that you as an individual, or the writer as an individual, is coming up against this mechanism of, for example, print publishing, which is very much like the collective mass, and there's, or whatever type of big publishing apparatus. It's those things come together, and often the poetry comes in the slippages and the problems, and I don't know. So that can, for me, that's quite exhilarating as a reader. But also, I feel like a lot of that happens in the work I was talking about, but you just have to read the work, and then that's kind of how that comes out.
Thank you. I think that Carson Chan, one of this morning's panelists, has a question.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentations. I guess it's on, right? It's a question for Julieta, and I guess Harry can chime in as well. But I was struck by your kind of characterization of how you started e-flux as a way of finding another kind of access to ideas that you didn't have a kind of venue for in your art practice, unless I'm misinterpreting you. And it struck me because this morning in my talk, I was talking about how Gideon was writing about you know, the condition he was living in, analyzing it and finding a kind of obstruction at some point, and just having to show a picture of art, and finding a kind of access in that where the force of the linear narrative that he was spinning out through words just stopped, right? Can you describe a little bit the freedom that you find in words that you can't find in art? And Harry as well.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to make two distinctions there. Yeah, one is there is e-flux and there is e-flux journal. However, both of them were started when Anton and I ran into the limits of this kind of like solitary figure of the artist, and what does that mean, and what does that do for us, and what it doesn't do. So e-flux, I mean, like, we just started as this experiment in circulation, then became the projects of which we have done many that are kind of like artworks, but are larger than artworks, and are archives, but are not archives, and we do not need to claim authorship, so we do not have this overbearing responsibility for them, and so that's one side, and which of course, and I mean, like, it's intimately related to my work as a solo artist. Yeah, I cannot separate them at this point. I stopped trying a long time ago. What happened with the e-flux journal? It was something in terms of like how ideas come into my work. This is a personal thing, and it allows both of us, I think, the possibility of not being the passive receivers of theory as it comes to us, but to actually encourage its generation and be like, okay, so there is this subject matter right now that is incredibly topical. I mean, like, I don't know, like, not to talk so much about myself, I'll mention Anton. He got totally like bitten by the bug of cosmism, yeah? So he's been using the journal more frequently than I would like him to. No, I'm kidding. No, as a way to explore a lot of text that was untranslated from the Russian, and to do a kind of like exploration that otherwise he would just be sitting somewhere waiting till that happens. Yeah, and I have done the same myself a number of times. So that's what I meant. You know, like the kind of a position that it gives us. It's really something I appreciate, and I'm quite grateful to have. Yeah.
I think it's to me that it is interesting in that I have to use words to stay alive, and I don't have to use art. And like that, I think there's like problems in making that division, but I think there's also like language is like, I don't know, that is, I don't know whether it's a freedom or not, but I think someone who's interested in both, there's that draws like a specificity to words and changes the idea of audience in a lot of cases.
Thank you. I think it connects to what has been discussed before in relation to the notion of community, and addresses Giulietta's and Rózsa's presentation more foremost. And while you were talking about the conceptual persona of super community and speaking in the I perspective, which I liked a lot, I thought of Grace Jones' Corporate Cannibal from 2008, the album Hurricane, that starts like, "Welcome on my plate, I'm the man-eating machine." And it's an amazing kind of video clip, and it's an amazing kind of piece of sonic substance. And I was wondering in relation to that the conflation of the consumer and the producer, that is very much kind of a corpus in the corporate cannibal, also could relate to the super community with regard to what is happening in the moment when the super community becomes apparent while eating itself up constantly. I mean, in terms of a digital metabolism that leads towards extinction. I mean, if we take this kind of corporate cannibalism as something that eats itself all the time, because also what you said, like it did exist already long before we could think of. So it's a kind of a deep time community that pops up and then maybe disappears again. So I guess my question with regard to that is, if we keep this kind of corporate capitalism, corporate cannibalism in mind, where do you sit here at the social contract in this kind of formation of community, if it kind of switches between the human and the non-human and geopolitical? You describe it beautifully, like traveling all the time and so on, but I think this also is a question for the printing, publishing. But also, I would really like to understand how you would consider the organizational formation. How does the organizational formation change in the moment when the super community kind of operates? Or, I mean, in which way do we have to rethink the organizational forms in a moment when we just vanish and are eaten up by the super community? Thank you.
You know, it's very funny because when we were writing the editorial text, we kept going back to a song and just like laughing a lot. Which was Sympathy for the Devil, and it was all like, "Please allow me to introduce myself," kind of thing. So there is a sound base. And sorry. The thing is, like, I guess we don't see the super community as this inherently capitalist construct. Yeah, it can be framed as such just because those are the easier framing tools that we have available right now. But I think that if it becomes framed as such, then you are only looking at one facet of it. I would like to think that the super community also includes plankton and acacia trees and that poor, very skinny polar bear that was floating in an iceberg a few months ago. Yeah, that's. I think that there is a kind of like a number of actors that are not writers or articulate enough or part of capitalist construct that enter this kind of very leaky construct, very leaky, very unstable construct. I think that the moment that, as I was saying, like the moment that I would try to define it, it would explode in my face. And as I do not want anything exploding in my face, I try to keep from too tight definitions of something. It becomes, I mean, like, because those I find those things prescriptive, and I would start hating myself if I would. I mean, like, I think already the word community is too loaded to give it more borders than that. If that, I mean, I used to say, okay, in the moment that I am using the word community to describe this particular endeavor, it means that this assemblage of things, people, and ideas are working together for this particular thing, and I don't want to. And maybe this is something that has to do with the preservation of my sanity, yeah? Because I never think in long term. I never think, okay, what is this going to become? What is this thing that I'm doing? Because then I will get very scared. So I can only think in very short term frames, I guess.
So, do you want me to speak about community? I don't know. Sorry. I've forgotten your question because I was listening. I don't know. I think I understand what you mean about wanting to resist defining it, and I completely agree that community is also a really loaded word. But because I'm quite practical and I more just do things, I'm not like a thinker or an artist. I just do stuff. I do think, you know, it's like, it's still like the e-flux super community, you know, it's still like in Venice Biennale, and you know, you like it's still a specific community. I don't know how much it can incorporate other actors, you know. It's like there is a specific audience, and like that's not in your control, obviously, you know. It's like how do you make things happen, and what and where, how can you do stuff. But I think that's yeah, maybe why, I don't know, like maybe why we regressed into print somehow, because actually it is so difficult to try and do something that looks to have a broader community, but that is within an art context, which is obviously like already loaded and problematic and already targeted as specific people. And so like with the print publications, what I found quite funny, and I think this is with a lot of independent publishers, that you see like more and more like art groups doing like small print runs and zines and stuff, is that like actually print media's dying out in loads of other, like, I don't know, professions or whatever, and that the dominant kind of media is the internet. And so and so I think that I feel like that we've done this opposite thing, where we're trying to like regress into like a smaller community, but then at the same time probably have the same confusions and concerns and conflictions, because then of course you're like, you know, you're being extremely like introverted and niche, and again there's this idea of exclusion, you know, with that introversion. So I guess it's kind of difficult on what to do, but it's, yeah, I just kind of, yeah, it's a difficult one. The word community, yeah, it's a tough word.
I mean, no, just to say that was some kind of like agreement, the community, to call it super community, because with Anton we basically have a system of agreement, which is the person that can scream the loudest wins. No, I'm really kidding. This is not true. No, but at some point, I mean, like, it's not really like we have to convince each other of things. There's no such thing as consensus in the way in which we build things. And if we, I guess, like that informs very much the idea of community that we have in mind, I guess, because if we cannot convince each other, and we being a community of two people working together for almost 15 years, then thinking about, and this is a question that has been asked a number of times, like, do you think about the people that receive the thing that you do? It's like, if I had to think about 30,000 people reading what I do, I would not get out of bed. I have to kind of like block out entirely this, the idea of needing or wanting to please this, I mean, but at the same time keeping, I mean, like, but that's not entirely true either, right? Like they I mean, it's they are there, of course, and like this kind of thing that that becomes larger than you is still there. And I really wish I could just make little like fanzines, like have a big, like a large photocopy machine, and and yeah, that's. Oh.
Maybe I just can specify, but there might be more questions.
Hi, hey. Yeah, what you were saying, Julieta, about this community idea, and for me, I don't know if you had it in mind of how it will then be embedded in other social media, and for example, this whole idea of Facebook comments and threads and rants and this sort of this space where it's encouraged to do the I monologue, rant, or exchange, and how do you think it is, how the sort of the form, I wouldn't call it the literally form of a comment or a thread, how it affects our way of thinking from, you know, because then it encourages you to be more like first person rather than like like analytical. But then is there then a gradient from like online comments in articles, Facebook, all the way up to the actual e-flux journal and the actual academia, or is it, do you see it embedded in that whole thing?
Very much, actually. A lot of the I do have I spend a lot more time in Facebook and in social media than I would like to admit, actually. And a lot of I've had fantastic conversations in comment boxes, in comment threads with people I have never met in real life. And a number of writers that are part of super community come from that kind of.
I know, like Mohammed is super active. Like there's some people who's just insanely active on
yeah,
Facebook.
Yeah. He's one of the examples, and actually he was running the super conversation responses to super community just to keep that kind of thing going, as a kind of. Because I'm quite fascinated by what happens in comment threads.
But do you believe in productive conversation? You believe in productive conversations and sort of within that environment?
I've had them.
You have them, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, just.
Do you see it related to that personal turn as well of how, of this idea that it's like okay, we're, you know, is there like a bubble of yes sayers and no sayers in the sense that
no, I've gotten into like heated fights and arguments and disagreements that then become agreements and conciliatory and unconciliatory things with people again that I have met, and we would never talk like that to each other in real life. It provides a buffer zone for a lot of things to be said.
Do you consider archiving those kind of exchanges?
They are archived. Yeah. No, they are, because now it's this moment when people are like, oh, are you going to make a book of this? And the conversation is like, well, we actually want to have those threads as part of the publication. I don't want to differentiate so much, and to make another thing that all of a sudden becomes too much of an ivory tower. Yeah, like that's. So yeah, that's.
What communities, Juliana, are you part of that? What communities are you part of that are not the super community? Or like what other communities are you part of apart from the super community? Does that make sense?
I mean, artists that make the same kind of work that I do, people that love cats insanely and then post cat videos without shame. Mexican artists that tend to be geographically placed against our will. I mean, like that's like a number of like subsets. And no, I think these are like subsets. It's like if you think of like Venn diagrams, yeah, like these things intersect. And I do not think that super community would be an all-encompassing definition for things. It's super boring.
Is the super community just the e-flux community?
No, actually it brings a lot of, the idea in a sense is to try to break out of the people that have been using and liking and default accepting and agreeing with these things. It's actually a lot of people that I don't even know who they are. I would like to think.
Maybe one last question? The audience? Okay. You're allowed to your second question.
I think it really connects to that what Adrian Piper also was saying earlier on. I just think the social and political responsibility, where do you situate it in these kind of structures and frameworks you are building up? I mean, do you conceive it more as a facilitator? I mean, the super community, it's not like a very present example, but also I would like to know more about what you been working on this infrastructure as a facilitator, as a detector of that what already does exist but needs to be amplified, or as a litmus test for kind of contemporary condition, also politically and socially. I just really, where do you situate yourself in this kind of organizational frameworks? I mean, what is it? What does it do? What do you want super community to do to the world, or what you are working on? Does this make sense, or is it too?
I think that's why I was asking you about how, you know, kind of from a practical sense, like how can super community like incorporate plankton and stuff, because, you know, it's actually, you know, an extension of e-flux, it's at the Biennale, blah, blah, blah. And I guess I was asking that because, you know, I have the same questions on a much smaller scale, which is this like, how, you know, how does something that was a space and a publisher that started from me just like coming, you know, out of art school and just being like, oh, I want to do a thing, and now it's almost 5 years, and with that you are like suddenly, when you were doing something that you thought was institutional critique, you're suddenly being accepted into the institution, you know, and it's like how do you negotiate that, and like what is your responsibility? And I guess I was asking you that because it is something that is like should be considered, and like there's nothing wrong necessarily with institution, like what is an institution, all of these are like a whole set of other questions, but you know, it's kind of like what I want to do practically, and kind of where I might make compromises in terms of like how much I do participate in the institution or whatever, is that ultimately all I want is to be able to, like, you know, it's selfish, I'm practical, it's like I want to be able to give platforms and have conversations with the people I'm interested in. You know, that's extremely selfish, but you know, that's the way that I can run it, and I guess that's the privilege that I have. You know, it's like if I wanted to be able to make a proper living off Arcadia Missa, then I would have to work with like more commercially viable artists or something, and actually, do you know what I mean? Like, I'd have to have loads of like white abstract like male painters, you know, and I don't want to, you know, so it's like there are these negotiations, and like, yeah, so it is something I'm having to consider more, and that's why I was asking you. And actually, like, the main consideration is to try and have autonomy in the program and not have to put something on just because you think that it's trendy or that it's going to sustain you, and like that's, yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, we should probably have a drink and talk about it, because I could, you know, like I could go on.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, just reflecting on that and what Julieta just said, I see similarities between the two of you, but I think super community seems to have more political aspirations, right? And in that sense, it can't just be for yourself, because you said before, I wish planktons would be part of the super community, which I think is a great idea. But how do you reach out to planktons? And do you know what I mean? Like with this agenda, it's, yeah, thanks.
I mean, this is and I fully agree with you. I mean, like, there is like so much negotiation that goes into this thing that I try to make it go in automatic, because if not, I would be an alcoholic, I think, or something. I mean, like something that is true of super communities, that it does have a big political agenda. That tends to be unescapable in the work, that at least in the collaborative work that I'm involved in, there are strong political positions, and it's kind of left-leaning, and that's all very true and quite self-evident, I would say. When I need to escape direct frontal politics, I go to my own work and I give myself lots of licenses to not address things on the face, which keeps my sanity. Again, that's a good thing. But I mean, I think that that said, I think with super community we do have a lot more space, at least at the moment, and may that stay for a long time, to explore things without the obligation to always refer them to a kind of political alignment, to explore things for the sake of form, or for the sake of language, or for the sake of their intrinsic beauty, or because I happen to like plankton very much, for example. I think it's something. I mean, I guess it's something about trying to consider things not only within the rarified universe of art world, but relationships of dependency, where maybe where I am, I mean, as rarified as this world is, it still echoes with the rest of things that we come in contact with, like the input from the world, yeah, like how to make sure that we do not close ourselves, being us being a kind of like internet platform, how to make sure that we do not close ourselves to things that are not just byproducts of technology, but how to make sure that we can, I don't know, like keep some kind of level field between what we get from this and what we get from an ecological crisis and the conflict in Syria and whatever is happening in my home country, yeah, like that it all, and plankton. Like how can it all enter, not super community necessarily, but at least the strands of thought that go into the making of such a project.
I now invite Harry Burke, Rózsa Farkas, and ieta Aranda to come back here in front, so we can have the panel discussion. And it's great because we are very much in time. We're even become more Swiss than the Swiss, 10 minutes in advance. So we have a lot of time for the discussion, which is very good, because this morning it was a bit frustrating. I'm sure you had some more questions in the audience and you couldn't ask them. So, where's it? Yeah, we're going to use the mobile microphones. I think it's better. Elise, do you want to start?
So maybe again I'm going to start with a question that tries to connect what we've just listened to. And to me it seems that in every presentation we were looking at alternatives, or something that is not part of some mainstream, or at least trying to resist a format that, in your case, Julieta, for example, as you said, became too academic for the mission you gave yourself in the beginning with e-flux. In the case of Harry, people following Gomringer's legacy as a way to, I guess, escape traditional poetry that has very strong canons as well, although he also entered, I guess, history. And in your case, Rózsa, trying to explore alternatives into publishing, considering that language is evolving and how artists are actually finding new ways, I'm not sure if they're new, but ways to actually publish their work and discuss ideas. So I guess my first question, maybe we can start with Julieta, is connected to that. Like, I think super community reflects that, because I agree that the format is much freer than e-flux indeed, but do you feel you managed to address all those issues that you were mentioning that you didn't kind of, or the format that you didn't manage to follow with e-flux? I mean, you said at some point that they were complementary, and I was wondering if
about a lot of the things that that we wanted as Anton and myself then have to accommodate the agenda and the desires and the writing curiosity of all the people that contribute to this project. So it's not anymore just two people trying to figure out how to do something, which super community, at least at this moment, gives us the chance to do. I mean, like, because with the journal at some point it also, people, you were talking about that at some point, like what happens with print, yeah? Like people started wanting books, and then we became a book publisher. and we have to deal with making books, and that's something that I never in my life thought I wanted to do, and it becomes this animal that then you are farming, let's say, and taming, but it's a different, I mean, like, it's not the freedom that now we regained with this new project. So, if that answers the question.
Sorry, my first question, maybe it was not super clear. I wasn't also sure about the question, but because, you know, I was trying to connect the three contributions, and I mean, do you agree that is that still possible to resist a format? Because I mean, you said maybe resistant is not the right word, but still, I think we here looking at alternatives, something that's different, and then it brings to mind notions such as being efficient. I mean, what about the audience? Because you said, Julieta, your agenda was actually devised according to your needs as artists with Anton and yourself back when you started e-flux. But what about the audience? You know, how, you know, I think I'm interested in this also relationship. How do you anticipate what your audience is going to be like, and how do you, you know, react to that? And why would you need to find new formats if, you know, how do you consider the audience within this, I guess, dynamic?
So in regards to, like, if you're able to find alternative formats, I guess that was what I was trying to say, is that of course you can, you just need to be very wary of how those are so instantly subsumed or co-opted, and I guess that was kind of my point. And in terms of, like,
if you could expand on that, or if you feel that my comment on being, you know, resistant to a certain format is accurate, and yeah.
I mean, in this particular case, I don't know if resistance would be the correct thing, because it would be like resisting myself, and that's not entirely the case. It's more when something, you know, like the analogy is like, I don't know, like, I guess, like you have a child and you want it to become an artist, but it wants to be a lawyer, yeah, or something like that, or you want it to be a lawyer, but instead it becomes an artist, and you have to just let it be and do another thing. I mean, like, I find that, like, at some point, the project became successful to a point that we didn't anticipate. I mean, like, this happened with just about everything we did with e-flux. We did not think that it was going to be 10 years long, yeah? Like, we started something thinking maybe we will do 3 issues. And then the next thing you know is you have been making a monthly magazine for 10 years. And it's like, okay, this is, you know, you see it, and then is when you look at it, and it's like, okay, so what happened in these 10 years? And is it still doing what we wanted to do? I mean, like, it's great that this is still there.